get going. So the topic here is achieving an effective outsourcing strategy that truly supports the development goals for emerging biotechs. So I think this hopefully will be very helpful to you. I will try to remember to make sure we have some time for questions at the end. Last panel, I was like, oh, forgot the questions. All right, so why don't we have our panelists introduce themselves. We have Lori Buckenmeyer, Cadmus Rich, Chelsey Ryan, and Timothy Peters Strickland, not in that order. So why don't we start with you?
Good afternoon, everybody. Lori Buckenmeyer. I am head of clinical operations and project management for Inception Group. Inception Group is a small privately owned professional outsourcing company who basically finds and matches resources, full service for sponsors for studies. We specialize in biotechs, working with small to mid-sized biotechs in relatively rare or complicated areas such as oncology, neurology, and also rare diseases.
Good afternoon, Timothy Peters Strickland. I'm a psychiatrist by training and work at PPD Biotech, where we're kind of in the larger global CRO space, but PPD Biotech is kind of a small organization within the larger group that adapts and is flexible to meet biotech needs.
Good afternoon, I'm Chelsey Ryan. I'm the Associate Director of Clinical Operations and Pharmacovigilance at PROMETRIKA. We're a full-service CRO based out of Cambridge, and we are a small CRO. We focus on partnering with our like-sized partners and being extensions of their team, focusing on oncology and rare disease. Really excited to be here. Thanks.
Hi, I'm the anchor. And it's great not to have to wear my mask up here. You guys should try this. It's good. Cadmus Rich, I'm Chief Medical Officer and Head of R&D for Aura Biosciences. We're a small biotech based here in Cambridge, developing a drug for choroidal melanoma, which has only radiation and blinds patients when they're treated. I guess I'm on the panel because I spent 5 years at Quintiles growing the therapeutic area in ophthalmology and have a pretty good extensive amount of CRO experience. So it's nice to be on the panel. Thank you for inviting me.
Wonderful. So from my perspective, the goal, at least in my mind for today, is we obviously have a bunch of really amazing experts who are CROs, or work for CROs, I should say. And I'm really hoping to get their perspectives, from their world, to really share with you, our CMO audience, just sort of how they think about, CRO selection, how they think about relationship management, and some of the issues that I'm sure all of us have faced, along the way as we're conducting clinical trials. So I guess the first question I'll ask from your perspective, if you were, speaking with a CMO, for instance, who's kind of thinking about, all right, I have a trial I need to do. I'm pretty sure I need to outsource in some way, shape, or form. My in-house, team is fairly small, and we've got, some people who are experienced at certain things, maybe not other things. How do I think about this? Let's start at the other end this time. And how do you think about this for you who are now in a company?
Right. I think the key is you have to know the customer. It's kind of funny to speak from this side now. It's been a few years. You have to know the customer. You have to understand the specific needs they have. And is that a full service? Is it a la carte? What do they need stats and data management? Do they need the full, monitoring and all the services? And I think you try to really learn the customer, get more than just the RFP that they send you, speak to them, know exactly what their needs are, and then try to figure out how you can provide what you think they need, which is always an interesting challenge when you go. I mean, one of the most fun things I did at Quintiles was go to these bid defenses. We have a dinner the night before, you talk about everything, and then you go in and talk to the customers and present what you think they want you to do. And hopefully you're right. And if you're right, they'll be happy and choose you as their CRO. But it's really about trying to tailor to what their needs are, specifically by area.
Yeah, I think you touched upon it, tailoring to their needs. We heard in the keynote about filling the gaps that the sponsor doesn't necessarily have within their organization, and becoming an extension of their team. Like I said in my intro, I think a CRO can come in and do everything for you, but a CRO can also come in and be an advisor, a consultant, to be a partner with you in the process. And just like any relationship that you have, that relationship's only good if it's a transparent one from both sides. And at PROMETRIKA, it's really important to us to understand where our clients are trying to go, our sponsors are trying to go in the end, and design that relationship with the end in mind and where you're strategically going as a company. And I think if you're starting your RFP process, if you're new to the process, I would approach it that way and be really open with your CRO, be really open about your goals as a company, because they will only be able to support you if they know where you're heading, and they'll only be able to be a partner if you're going there together. So transparency is key.
Yeah, and let me pick up on that, Chelsey. I think of it as you have to build this foundation of communication across the team and both parties. And then what sits on top of that for me is trust, transparency, and collaboration. Because if you have those things, you can work through anything. And, a little bit of adapting what you said too was we want to be a thought partner, right? That's the best kind of development partner I think a CRO can be, or any vendor, entering a relationship can be.
And I'm going to kind of loop it back to what Cadmus started with as far as really taking a look internally. So my best advice to CMOs is really be honest with yourself as to what you do have in place. A lot of times we will have sponsors come to us and be like, I need this, this, and this. And when they really take a look at it, the people that they have internally either can or cannot support that. So a lot of times what happens is they outsource to multiple CROs for multiple different functions, not realizing that they need to manage each one of those people. And your internal staff can't handle that. So really taking a picture internally as to what your true needs are, and then being open and honest as far as exactly matching to those people. That's one of the things we specialize is taking every single opportunity and finding the correct person that matches that opportunity as far as the indication and everything else that the sponsor is looking for, and really becoming embedded within that team, that when you're looking at your internal team, you're considering your partner as part of that internal team. It's not a separation. You basically are looking at all the staff exactly in the same way as far as leading your study.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the best teams that function, efficiently and really get things done are ones where you don't know who's on the sponsor side and who's on the vendor side, right? So you just work seamlessly together as a unit. So that's what I found that works best.
I was going to just say, I think I've seen situations, however, where it is a little bit of an us and them, right? And you very much can sort of feel who's who. And that, I think, can get in the way, right, often. And that's where when, challenges come up sometimes, I think you see a little bit of the finger-pointing thing going on as well, right? So I think it's easier said than done, maybe, right, to actually feel like you're really working as a seamless team. So maybe if you have any sort of specific experiences about how you've managed to really do that in a way that it's worked well, and then maybe a scenario if you have one where it hasn't, but then maybe you've been able to sort of solve that problem.
You have to create a safety net for people, right? You have to get a team to be able to you have to create a space where the team will feel safe speaking up, right? No matter about what the issue is. And then once you bring whatever issue up, then you can resolve it. I'm a psychiatrist, so that comes natural to me. But I think it is critical for people, because if people are on the outside of that kind of circle of trust, they're not going to perform well. They're not going to be part of the team, right? They're halfway in and halfway out. And then they're not going to be contributing and adding to the team like they should be. And then that obviously creates some of the challenges, right, that we all see and we've all lived.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah.
And I think building on that a bit, you started talking about, you're a CMO, how can you work with your CROs to get the best out of your CROs? And making that safe environment, I think, sometimes I've seen relationships with sponsors that, you try to say something directly and transparently, and it's not exactly what the sponsor maybe wanted to hear. And those conversations can be really hard. But I think having a relationship and a partnership that's also built on empathy and understanding that the CRO also doesn't want to be giving bad news to their sponsors. But it's really important that you have that relationship where you as a sponsor know your CRO is not going to hide bad news from you. You want to be able to hear that right from the very beginning. You want to be at the very beginning stages of planning how to pivot and, turn that, whatever it is, around for your project. And your CRO is only going to do that if you've created a safe space for you to have those conversations. That can be hard.
Fully agree. Did you have a comment?
Oh, I was going to give an example. I actually have been working with a client for the last few years that pre-pandemic, I had the opportunity of actually being able to go into the office. And it got to a point that we built trust so much that I'd be walking down the hallway and people not even on my study would pull me aside and say, hey, can you do this or can you do that? And when you can turn around and say, yeah, I'd be glad to help you out with that. I'm not assigned to that, but being that embedded, that you've built the trust is really what it's all about and what makes them want to engage more and more with you and your project teams.
Right. That's a great example.
And it's a different mindset too. I mean, one thing that came to mind, Chelsey, with what you just said is having the mindset of, the first things out of your mouth is not no, but it's yes and, right? I mean, you figure out a way, right? You work together.
Well,
That's a great point.
Just to add, I think it's the relationship starts at the beginning. So having good expectations and realistic expectations. And I think Lori hit on something that I think a lot of early companies don't understand, which is how much time it takes from the company's perspective to manage the relationship. You need a full-time person to manage each major part of the relationship on your side. You're not hiring a CRO necessarily just to fill in for you, and you don't need those people. And that's really important. And then what happens is a lot of times they go, well, we asked you to do this. And it's like, well, who on your side are we supposed to get feedback from, So you have to have the right amount of resource on both sides, and the expectations up front is really, really important.
So let's talk a little bit about expectations up front. And actually, let's go even a little bit further back, I think, to one of the very, very important pieces of this, which is the RFP, right? I've seen situations where, you're in a rush, you got to find a CRO and whatever, throw together an RFP, and then you're disappointed with the proposals that come back because they're not addressing what you feel like, should have been addressed. And it may actually have been the RFP that's the problem. So can you talk about what you need to see, expect to see in a really good, top quality RFP?
Well, I like to listen to the sponsor, the client, and hearing what they're asking for, but also hearing what they're not asking for, and trying to, and ask the question, what is keeping you up at night? What is the most important thing here to you that matters most, right? Because each client is going to be different. And I think if you understand that going in, you're going to be more likely to hit the target than if you're not, right? And just being real, right? None of us are invincible, right? We're all going to make mistakes, but have a conversation about it.
Mm-hmm. And if I can add, one of the things that I think Inception does really well is we don't wait for that RFP to come in. We're having those conversations far in advance so we can actually help our sponsors and our partners work through the RFP. Because things that they may not even be thinking about, or even ways to outsource as part of the RFP process, for a lot of CMOs that are new into the industry, it's a foreign concept. I mean, I think one of the CMOs that spoke this morning, said that he did a lot of business classes and all that kind of stuff just to get used to the finances and all that kind of stuff. You have to rely on your partners to be able to walk you through what that process is going to be. And it's not all about the milestones and what the deliverables are that you're looking for. It's a lot about the culture and the fit of the team that you're going to get. So if you can have those conversations even before the RFP comes out, so you can say to them, what all needs to be in this RFP? Is it a simple checklist as far as roles and responsibilities? Is it further details that you need to provide so you do get it right the first time?
Mm-hmm. Great points, great points. Did you have something?
And
Chelsey, to add?
yeah, I did. So in our experience, sponsors, there's a wide range of what an RFP means. Sometimes it's, hey, put together this proposal, and we're literally giving you a paragraph of information about the study and make a design for us. There's that. Then there's sponsors that have really, really detailed RFPs that have a ton of information that they know exactly what they want. And I think my advice would be, the RFP process from the CRO side of things, it's a pretty intense process to, get all the information from you and get together the group of experts to give you the best proposal back. If you know more than, just that snippet, and there's something that you want out of your RFP, give that information to your CRO, because it will make your entire process so much faster. And RFPs, they're a process. There's back and forth. There's questions that come out of them. And I would also say, don't rush the questions. I know that there's always, a timeline, and that's very important. And being upfront about that timeline, most CROs, I think, are going to meet the timelines if there is one. But take the time to answer the questions, because your iterations will be so far fewer if you take the time to just give all the information that's really needed to give you the best proposal, and it will also save you change orders,
And if
which
I
I
can just,
think you're going to change orders next.
Yeah, we're going to talk about change orders, but go ahead.
and I was going to say, if I can just add on to that, I know you're going to hear a lot, transparency, but the why behind some of your requests are as important as the question that you're asking. So you could have something in an RFP, but if you don't truly explain why you want or you're asking that, it's difficult to then place a bid back. Or it gives the partner the opportunity to come back to you and say, do you really want it this way, or have you thought about this? So the why behind a lot of those questions, not only thinking about them before you answer, is really important a lot of times in finding that best partner to work with you.
Well, and that collaboration piece, right? More brains are better than one, right? Because, for example, colleagues will always think of things differently than I do, right? And sometimes it doesn't add value, but most of the time it does add value, because we all have blind spots.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think you hit on the right thing, which is the RFP is a process. It's not a document. And I think a lot of people work hard to put a document together and send it off to 7 CROs.
Yep.
And then they get back the responses and they try to decide who's coming for the bid defense. The reality is the RFP is so critical to think through. We spend all this time on protocols and FDA correspondence. You should spend the same amount of time on your RFP. And you should send a relatively similar RFP to every single vendor, so you're comparing apples to apples. And I think the ones that call you back and ask you questions about the RFP first, before they send you their RFP back, their response, those are the ones you probably are going to invite to the bid defense.
Totally agree with that.
Because they are the ones that are taking the time to know you, right? And you get to know them a little bit better. And it starts to build the circle of trust that Peter was talking about.
Yep. Yeah, and I fully agree on the spend time on that RFP. That's the only way, I think, that you're going to get sort of the best sense of who the right partner is going to be for you, because you've given them the opportunity, right, to describe to you how they're going to address, and meet your needs, right? So, yeah, key. So, all right, so you've selected your CRO, and it's time to get going, and, you got your kickoffs and all that stuff. So what do you expect from your sponsor, right around that time? What are the sort of the key things you really need to feel like you've addressed during that startup process?
I can start with this one. I think if you've done the RFP process in a way where you've really made it a process, you've gotten to know one another, you know what the sponsor's coming to the table with and what the CRO is there to do, then you should know at that point who's going to do the protocol indication training, who's going to talk about, the scientific elements, which is probably going to be the sponsor. And I would expect that the sponsor's engaged in that. It's a super critical point at your KOM to have an understanding of who's doing what. And then I think just, setting those if it's not the same exact team that you did the RFP with, setting those expectations at your kickoff meeting of what you need as a sponsor, what you need, how you like things communicated, how you like things documented. If there's anything that's like your personal preference, then's the time to say it. If you let that go too far, I think that's where relationships start to deteriorate and you don't intend it to. But if you just get things out at the beginning, it's a great time to do it at the kickoff meeting.
Well, that's one thing, Chelsey, I don't think as an industry on both sides that we do well, right? I mean, that back and forth during the RFP process. And, you know, in my background, I worked for a sponsor who held their cards very close to their chest, only gave minimal amount of information. There were no kind of details behind the whys. And, you know, I learned that that's probably not the best way to function, right? That it's better to kind of be more transparent. If you give more information, you're likely to get the information you need back,
Yeah.
right? And I relate it to a patient example that everyone will identify with. So in practice, I treated this guy for anxiety and depression, and for about a year, and he was doing well, and he was an older gentleman, and he got anxious one day and called me, and I prescribed a benzo for him, right? You know, short term, you know, to treat his anxiety because he wasn't doing well. Well, guess what? He didn't tell me. He's in recovery. So he started drinking and ended up in rehab and ruined his life, right? I mean, major turmoil. And he comes back to me and he's very angry at me for doing this. And I'm thinking, gosh, you know, I must have missed this, right? I didn't remember correctly. And I look back through my record. He didn't tell me that. That was something, obviously, I was very mindful of because I don't want to hurt people. And see, it's where that transparency and that privacy in him not wanting to tell me or bias me hurt him, right? And I didn't do it on purpose. But and so I think that's a good example, you know, with the CRO and a client, where the more transparent you are, the more you're going to get what you need back. Right? And you're going to end up with a better product at the end of the day.
And if I can, I'm going to take kind of a step back to that between the RFP and the kickoff meeting. The important piece in there is finding your team and building your team. You know, the RFP is great to outline what you want, but what you need to do is take that RFP and say who's going to be doing it and making sure that's the fit. I worked for 20-some years before I came to Inception in a very large CRO where I was responsible for resourcing, and I always called it my chess game. I was taking static resources and trying to move them from client to client to meet the urgent need as far as what was coming up today and tomorrow, and those were the people that were going out in the RFPs. I knew in a lot of cases those were not the people that were going to be on the project team. They were the people that were going out to present the RFPs, but then who knew who it was going to be go forward from that? One of the things I tease, you know, my boss about all the time is Inception to me is a matchmaking service. So for every proposal that comes in the door, we find the person that not only fits the indication, but also fits the culture of that company. And that's the person that goes in and works through the RFP, gets to know the client. So when you're walking to that kickoff meeting, not only are you starting from scratch as far as what all needs to be done and whose responsibilities they are, it's really a team building exercise. You're getting to know that person. And I know that sounds really hokey. And today in a lot of the virtual world, it's not as easy to do some of those team building sessions. But some of the best kickoff meetings I've been at literally have had team building sessions built in so you could get to know your counterpart and who you were working with on a personal level so you knew how you're going to be working with them through the day.
Great points.
I was just going to add, so the other thing to add to what you just said about making sure it's the person, the indication experience there, the phase experience, whatever you're doing is the right person for the project. One of the things that we try to do is also keep that person as you move forward in your development. So if you have other phases that you award us, then you would be given the same project team as our goal so that you're creating that long-lasting relationship over the course of your development, similar to what you would be doing on your sponsors team, your sponsor teams, that, you know, your teams stay as a core group. And I think that's really, really important as CMOs when you're going out there and you're assessing the CRO that is the right CRO, the right match for your company, when you're thinking about the size of your company and how agile your company is. If you're talking about a smaller company, it's really great to not have turnover. And turnover is a huge problem in our industry. So if you can get consistency in your project teams and it's coming from a CRO that that actually happens, that's a big deal for you. It'll save you a lot of time in creating new relationships every single time you have a new project and trying to, say, hey, but the other team did it this way and that worked really well for us. So just another tidbit there.
Yeah, just one quick anecdote to that is the timing of all these things. So the CRO works hard to put together the team that comes to the bid defense and gets you comfortable. And if your project's not starting for 6 months, you're not getting the same team.
Exactly.
Because they have to use the team for other projects. So you also want to be engaged with the sponsor on, what's your timing? When are you going to start? Do you have drug already? We've all been down and I've lived the drug thing myself. That's like, oh, we're starting in a month. And it's like, oh, we don't have drugs. So it's going to be 6 months. I was just kidding. So that's another thing. Working with understanding the industry side and letting the sponsor know what that means and trying to make sure they're being steered the right way. Because it's like, well, this might not be the best time for you to have bid defenses,
Right.
So.
Yeah, and I think this is where the transparency comes in, right? From both sides, right? I mean, I think oftentimes the company, wants to get the CRO selected, all that stuff, and knowing we're not sure exactly about when we're really going to be able to. So maybe we don't even have the financing for it yet, et cetera. And yet, I think we often have this expectation that no matter what, I'm going to get that same person that was at that, bid defense, right, for instance, which is often not necessarily a realistic assumption.
Well, and Beth, it's about leadership, right, on both sides. And it's easy to lead when things are going well, but it's really, that's when you learn is when things aren't going well as a leader, right, and what to do and how to manage. And I think, that you can bring the team together at that point, or you can help splinter them where they go in different directions and it makes it worse. And I've done both, right? So I kind of know what the right way is now that works for me.
Great. So let's switch over to the change order discussion. I think that probably one of the most common complaints, I guess, that, that pharma companies, biotechs have is the change orders, right? We just hate these change orders and why, and these CROs, they just keep throwing this stuff at us and come on. So, I think it'd be very helpful for this audience to kind of hear from your perspectives. Okay, so let's just face it, change orders are going to happen because I've not seen a single study that, where nothing changed from start to finish, right, in terms of the activities that were needed. But if you could speak to kind of how do we work together on this? How do we, minimize, if at all possible, the change orders that are happening? And then, what about communication around change orders, right? What are the sort of the best practices there to avoid that inevitable bad reaction?
So I'll start with the elephant in the room. So I think it goes back to the initial responsibilities and the RFP and the contract. And what I mean by that is I've worked with several clients that send out an RFP that has 17,000 lines as far as units that everybody is trying to hold to. Keep it as simple as possible, because the less items that you're having to work to, the better chance that you're not going to have to do change orders. The other thing is consistency of your team. So if you can go into a more full FTE responsibility, if things shift slightly throughout the project, it's not going to make a determination of doing a change order or not. It's only when those big items, such as like timelines or countries or adding multiple sites to a specific location will come up, you can kind of flex your team otherwise. But if you're in a unit grid where every single one of those activities is being counted and you're tracking to those, your change orders are going to be astronomical and are going to keep coming up across the board.
I think too, so I said it before, but designing with the end in mind and really thinking about beyond today and what you know today, but where you're trying to go on your project is huge. And also not underestimating that one of the things that often is asked about is like the project management time or the meeting time. And those are not the places that I would advise that you're taking time out of your budget. Those are the places where you can be productive, you create the relationships, and you create efficiencies. I think too, the transparency piece is huge. So making sure that you're telling your CRO and talking to them about exactly what you want, but also being open to ways that the CRO has seen efficiencies to put into your proposals and hearing them from the beginning. There's been many a time that I've suggested something and it's not taken. We go a different way, and that's okay. That's fine. But then I've seen it happen that ended up being something that would have saved money in the long run, and that can happen on any project, and it's not always that's how it pans out. Maybe it pans out the other way, but I think just having those open conversations and being open to them at the beginning and not saying, oh, we'll just wait and see, that will save you time on change orders. The last thing I'll say is just, I don't know about you guys, but I regularly hear go with the best case scenario. And when has the best case scenario ever really happened?
Yeah.
I just don't think it happens because we have pandemics, we have, other things that have come up that slow things down. I think planning for a realistic scenario is the much better way to go, and will just save you headaches in the long run, because then you're planning your whole timeline in a way that you're presenting realistic timelines to your investors, to your executive boards, to everybody that you're accountable for. So if you're giving them the best case scenario and you don't deliver, that's a whole other thing that you're going to have to deal with that's difficult.
Right, and definitely not just best case scenario in terms of timelines, but cost as well,
A budget.
right? And
It's
realistic
huge.
from the get-go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen many scenarios where, you'll have, say, 3, RFPs in and whatever, and you're like, okay, well, let's see what we can cut out of this. Let's go low as we can. And in the end, you end up spending even more than you would have from the get-go if you'd just gone with sort of the more reasonable and appropriate budget, right?
Yeah, I think the change order starts before you sign the contract.
Yep.
Because if you don't have the right contract in place,
Exactly.
it comes down to 2 things. It's the financing and it's risk management.
Mm-hmm.
And there should be a discussion about risk management up front. And that's really what you're talking about. And that's best case scenario is not good risk management. That's the worst risk management. So I think it's really about having the financial discussion and then also building on what Chelsey said earlier, the long-term relationship. So when you're meeting with the CRO and you're selecting a CRO, you're selecting a partner not for today or for this study, hopefully for the long term. And you want to also build that relationship in as well, pricing-wise, to see if there could be discounts on future studies, but also on risk management, the team, and those things. Those should all be discussed before you sign a contract. And from the CMO side, that's when you have the most leverage. And from the CRO side, that's where you have the most flexibility. Because management wants to win the work, and they're willing to help you be able to deliver for the customer, and the CRO or the CMO and the company wants to know what's going to happen, and they want something that's reasonable and that they know that it's going to they can take it to the board and not still sleep at night kind of thing, and I think that's important.
And one of the things I think about is, I'll just say it in a different way, garbage in, garbage out, right? That if you don't spend the time up front now, you're not going to get the benefits downstream, right? If you spend the time up front and do what needs to be done and ask the hard questions and have those difficult and challenging conversations, chances are you're going to build that foundation for the future, right? I mean, it's like a relationship, right?
Any relationship.
I mean, do you get married after the first date? Well, some people do, and that can work out. But no, it didn't work out for me, right? I mean, it's a process, right? And you need to invest the time to get the benefits on the back end.
And I think a lot of what you're hearing up here right now in the change order also comes back to your partnership, whether it's more transactional or a true partnership. Because if you are doing transactional studies or programs, you're going to be more apt for those change orders than being in a partnership where you can flex and you can go across multiple studies and say, okay, well, for this one you did have a change, but this other one that we're working on, that can kind of filter in. So, using your partners across the portfolio instead of transactional for every single function or every single study that you have becomes very important to try to mitigate those change orders in there.
Well, and it's looking at that operational risk up front and the financial risk and trying to marry those and balance those, right? Because they're not separate.
Well, and does the CRO want to risk share with the customer? Because that is a relationship that larger CROs can afford to be doing, and the company may pay a little more up front, but they know they're getting a fixed price, or as long as they don't make major scope changes, but or not, or I mean, I've been in relationships where the cost of the study was very low, and the company, the CRO gets a piece of the action later, or percentage of the company, or there's all kinds of ways to make these kind of relationships.
I was
That's
going to
the
say
key.
a lot of different models that one can take,
Ton
and
of
really
different
it's a
models.
matter of
Actually, I would say everything's on the table till it's not.
right, very true, and it's just have those conversations and.
Don't go with the cheapest price.
I agree. Look, I have to say, I mean, I learned my lesson. So, all right. So let's talk a little bit. We don't have that much time, but there was a question that came through around sort of, one CRO full service versus kind of the functional service provider model. I mean, how do you think about this yourself as members of CROs?
We can do anything. Right?
I knew
So
someone would say that.
Our model is to meet the customer, the client where they are.
Yep.
Right? So we can do the whole thing. We can do pieces. We can do the Lego blocks over here and some over here. So.
And how should the companies be thinking about this?
Well, I think that you need to have those discussions, right? You need to start out those, like, what do you need? What do you think you need, right? And then have that dialogue, and then you have, you do some gap analysis, and then you say, well, what about this? This is where I see that you have a deficit over here, whether it's medical, whether it's in PV, whether it's in operations, consulting.
So Inception Group is a full service. We start actually with that full service, but can break it down into any functional or any contract that we need. But I think a key point that the CMOs need to be thinking about is, and I think we talked about it earlier, is what support do you have internally? Because the more you split it and you divide, you have to manage those pieces versus going to one person that is going to manage all the pieces for you once you find that, the person that you can trust to basically hand over your study to.
And I think the other piece to think about is your SOPs. So if you're doing, a functional service provider, for some elements and some elements you're keeping in-house, you need to think about how your SOPs are going to work together, and make sure that, you're being transparent with your CRO and those SOPs, that maybe you're doing ClinOps with a CRO, but you're keeping biostats and DM internal. But you're building an EDC. How is the ClinOps going to work with your biostats and data management, and making sure that it's a seamless relationship where you're all getting, to the goal?
Very important.
It is a little tricky because the CRO knows better how the relationship's going to go because they've done it 1,000 times. So trying to help the customer get to where you think they should be and know their resources, right? And that's where that RP process is so important, because in reality, the most CMOs and small biotechs don't have enough experience working with multiple CROs and multiple projects.
Right.
So you really should be depending a lot on the CRO to help
Agree.
you. And hopefully it's a two-way communication stream, because the CRO knows a lot more than you do about how to do all these things. But of course, they also are trying to sell you the full service first and then
Sure.
do the thing. But there's also a reason for that. It works better.
Yeah.
In general, it works better.
Yeah.
If
Well,
all the
and-
pieces are together.
Yeah, and in the small biotechs, one of the advice I would give is sometimes start small. Start with a function. Find that provider who does a really good job, and then expand from there. I know most of our business is repeat business or clients that we have that are expanding outside of that. So we started in medical writing, and now we're doing their entire clinical program. Or vice versa, we start with a clinical program, they discover what our resources can do and how much they are a part of the team, and then we expand into other functions to the point where you get to full service on the next study.
Great.
Well,
We're
and
about out of,
And it's the cultural fit, right?
I just want to make sure we get to this question because
oh, yes, I was just about to take a question, so.
we'll need to go to the next session.
So it's about cultural fit, right? I mean, between the two companies and actually the culture of the company,
Yeah.
like PPD Biotech or PPD. I mean, one of our tenets is do the right thing.
We don't have to go to the next session. I'm very sorry.
Did you have a question? No?
We have a question here real quick.
Okay, yep, sorry, I can't see.
Yeah, it should be a quick question. I was wondering what you think about shared reward rather than shared risk. Have you ever seen, getting an incentive if you hit an aggressive timeline for milestones? And does that create perverse incentives or, does it work well?
Maybe one response, if there is any?
I see it as the same, two sides of the same coin. So I think you could talk about risk management, or you could talk about rewarding for meeting a stretched timeline. And I think that, that's the negotiation you have up front, whether it's, shared pricing, risk-based pricing, or an incentive-based pricing. Those are all kind of related to each other, and I think it would work well.
Great.